This is the first in what will be a series of read-throughs of this game, Circle of Hands, as I explore it, discover it, get to know it, and ultimately play it. Circle of Hands is, or describes itself as an Iron Age setting, specifically a stark mud and dung Iron Age setting with, well, let's say a view of itself that it's very gritty and serious. We'll see if that, among other things, is true. Now, this first in the series, this is going to look at what's in the beginning of the book. The book itself opens up with a short half-page author's note where the author prepares you for what this game is supposed to be like or supposed to represent. And I like the first sentence. Circle of Hands is about survivorship, not victimhood. And the opening prose, although it's the author's voice speaking to you directly, does end with the idea that a circle of hands is a group of people in a very bad situation, standing up and standing together with each other, not as victims, but as survivors. I like that imagery, I like that intent, and now I'm even more curious to see if, you know, what is written here can actually enable a group to find that within themselves to produce. It also lists inspiration and partners in crime, and I'd like to go over that because that'll put the rest of everything else in context. So listed as inspiration, Steve Perrin and Greg Stafford, obviously. Background for RuneQuest, there are specific supplements listed. The American and the British Steve Jacksons for their contributions: Melee, Wizard, Fantasy Trip, Sorcery, Fighting Fantasy. All right, so he's seeing the author's influences, where the author came from as a gamer, what formed that person's initial viewpoint on games, right? I find that this kind of inclusion will definitely help me, being familiar with this material, understand better what they were going for, what they were moving away from. So I'm glad to see that it's here. Also, surprising mentions for me, Prince Valiant is listed in here, Over the Edge by Jonathan Tweet, Magic the Gathering by Richard Garfield, and the Babylon 5 game. Well, maybe not the game, maybe the television series. Okay, so interesting inspirations and influences. Now, listed in Partners in Crime, listed without permission, are a lot of familiar names as well. Jake Norwood, who did the complicated but very compelling Riddle of Steel. James Raggi, Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Shadow of Yesterday is listed. Vincent Baker's Apocalypse World Dark Ages is listed. Crone is listed. Raphael Chandler is listed. Interesting people. Ralph Mazza and Keith Sankowski, Conspiracy of Shadows. So, influences, partners in crime, people that maybe supported the development of the gamer as a new and upcoming hobbyist, and then people whose interplay later on in life became important. So, how to understand the game. The next section moves into the community, the long list of people who backed it, and this is something I find very useful as someone who supports a fair number of Kickstarters and can frequently be annoyed by them. The very first section in the 2-page spread on the Kickstarter details when the Kickstarter ran, what its initial goal was, how much it actually raised, how much that actually turned out to be after the Kickstarter and Amazon fees, and then what the money was spent on. I really appreciate that. And then there's the list of the different levels of backers, followed by personal thanks, followed by something that's entitled Periphery, where the author lays out maybe the underpinnings of the design philosophy, and what music the person was listening to while they wrote. I like this just fine. I'm now that I've seen this done, I want to see it more. All right. So, in terms of the philosophy, the world as will and representation, right? Schopenhauer, and beyond good and evil, Nietzsche. And there's a hint, a tease. The rules include little references to other writers here and there if you're looking for them. Maybe I'd like to see those spelled out, but maybe we're not always aware of the influences that spill out into what we write, and that's certainly true. All right, and then we get into this stark black and white, very serious warrior-style art, and Chapter 1 is called Original Metal with the subtitle, What It Looks Like. So we'll move on from there. In Chapter 1, as I assume elsewhere in the book, there's a little bit of artistry and manipulation going on. So Original Metal, What It Looks Like, opens with the author speaking to the reader directly. You know, the world is gritty and pre-medieval, blah, 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 and setting you up for what to understand. This is person talking to person. It's not in-game fiction or anything like that. But then it kind of slips to the left, and it suddenly seems like Game Master talking to player. Imagine with me a place, having ridden through the setting of the scene, you know. And as you move through that opening kind of Game Master to player dialogue, it starts to take on narrative voice to character, like the internal dialogue. You see this, you feel this, you're writing this, you know. And I don't mean the emotions that the character, the you, is feeling. I mean, it's really setting the scene for the character. A lot of description, a lot of setting material in, you know, kind of like a boxed text sort of description, but not from the tactical point of view, but from the experiential point of view. How can I very briefly and quickly encapsulate some of the recent experiences of your character leading up to this point so that you can confidently spring into action as your character in some way? You know, that's how the book opens, like a game would open. You've had a previous discussion about, do we want to play this game? What's this game like? You've made characters, and then the group begins to work in tandem, shifting from the perspective of the player coming to the table, sitting down, looking at their character sheet, and then sliding into character. So that's an interesting way to start the book, I think. And then you turn the page, and that's all gone. And what you get is an in-your-face, 2-page, bullet point style chart called the Absolute Rundown. And I totally agree with this opening sentence. The thing about RPG rules is everyone wants to know and understand everything all at once. It's like we want to consume it like flesh, you know. It's like we want to. It's like the dripping hamburger of life. So apparently, these 2 pages, pages 10 and 11, concern themselves with what is called a data dump of information about what the game actually is. The setting, most common technological materials, types of armor used, chief weapon, right? What is and isn't here, no heraldry, no knightly culture. Brace yourself for horror, no education, talking about the map, regions, magic, type of magic, black and white, prevailing religion, right? Drug culture, type of character, what the circle is, player characters are, what the fictional culture includes, what we do as players. So for example, everyone makes 2 characters. How characters are described, the role of the GM, what play doesn't concern, right? What adventures are, what they're called ventures here, what they do, right? Improvement through experience, resolution, social rank, more about the culture, fighting, types, class resolution, weapons, and what happens when you die. 2 pages. Interesting. I really like the games that include the 2-page character creation shorthand sheet, so you can not spend your time flipping back and forth. Well, for the game master and for the player to be able to say, okay, what is this game actually about? Boom, 2 pages. Simple bullet points to talk about and say, you know, I'm not really sure I want to play a game that has, you know, element X in it, or I can't wait to play this game because of element Y. All About Play is next. And how do I want to talk about this? All About Play takes us into, I should say there's a little spillover from the previous page of even smaller bullet points. Here is where we go back to the author talking to the potential game master, I guess, in that mechanically, how do you get into preparing a session and a linked series of sessions? That opens up with multiple ventures as the heading, but I think the more important thing to look at in this recap, which is now getting a little too long, is how your play experience is going to be structured. And they're split into 3 pieces: the backdrop, situations, and scenes. So the backdrop, situation, scenes. And there is a chart to represent that. Backdrop, situation, and scene. Backdrop is what people understand does and can happen, what people understand of where you are. The situation, that's what's going on. And that includes the characters. What forces are coming together to create a reason to do anything in this game today. And then finally, the scenes. This is where we play. The actual action that takes place, conflict resolution and whatnot. So according to the author, who very specifically spells it out on page 13, the whole book is organized off the diagram below, and we've already seen signs of that. Okay. So chapter 2 is the backdrop. Chapter 3 is situation for players and GM. Chapter 4 is playing scenes, and chapters 5 to 7 are the mechanics, subroutines for play, it's called, concerning fighting, magic, and creatures. Then we turn the page and we get to a procedural outline. What to do from getting the book, right? Make a circle, the group of player characters. Prepare the first venture. Play it. Prepare the next venture. Play it. Rinse and repeat. That may seem obvious to some, but that's the key point, isn't it? To some. Then we get into talk about social contract. And there's a note at the beginning of the book thanking all the people for their feedback, the inspiration over the years. And Meg Baker is cited as being most influential in the area of the social contract. So we have 2 pages almost on this. Social contract is something that some people say, I don't need those social contract. We always just play the same way. The implied social contract there, I guess, being obvious to some and not others. But there is, I guess, a difference in feeling you have to have a social contract in order to lay out what will and will not happen in play. If you're playing just for fun with people that you know well and whatnot, do you need to sit down and formally write out? Does everyone need to say, I promise I will not violate the tenets of our social contract? Do they need to be, as I've said before, smacked on the head like a dog with a rolled up social contract when they violate that agreement? I think we can take the word contract too seriously. However, this game is taking itself very seriously, and this game is proposing subjects, situations, an environment that truly is ugly. Agreeing to play this game is going to require a little bit of discussion, at least, about how you'll play it. What kind of personal or less personal information can be brought into play. Situations that someone has kept inside themselves are very serious to them, which are very private, may accidentally or perhaps intentionally be spilled out on the table and then surprise them, horrify them, bother them. I don't want to get into the idea of trigger warnings and all of that sort of thing, but this is that kind of game. This is not swashbuckling, swinging from chandeliers, saving the victim, and nobody dying in the end. This is not that game at all. And so I guess, as much as I am not one who really likes to talk about overt or express social contracts, and even though in my own personal experience I've had more negative role-playing experiences with groups who harp on social contracts than I have with groups who just want to play, that example I gave at the beginning, even when there's no explicit social contract, very, very quickly in the course of arranging a game, there's an implied one. This is what we are going to do. So laying that out in a game with a setting like this, I don't think is doing the wrong thing. So what did all that rambling mean? Okay, so the author sets out the social contract this way. He's taking responsibility for the backdrop of the game. Okay? But the players and the game master working together, they're taking responsibility for what's actually going to happen in it. Okay? So, while there's the usual stuff about, you can change, yada, 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 when we get into the actual technique section of the social contract area, it's all billed as I will not abandon you. And this is what the game is about, and this is what playing the game is ultimately, or how it's ultimately expressed. Some watching this video will already be aware of lines and veils, if not a brief description from the book. Lines are one's personal limits to content being in the fiction at all. So when you sit down to play, if there's something that you do not want to be in this game, you got to say it. Everybody else understands, accepts it, and it will not appear. Veils are your personal limits to content being explicitly depicted. So implying that its presence is acceptable as long as it's narrated and imagined less directly. So if someone has a problem with imagining something, but they don't have a problem with it existing in the game, then we will veil it. We will cut away from it. We'll fade to black or whatever. Its presence is allowed. Its graphic depiction we move away from. Lines and veils. In a game with such serious and adult themes, such horrific possible events, we adopt this culture of play. Now, of course, many of us out there already have this culture of play, but for many of us out there, it may not be an explicitly defined technique. It may not be a technique that we are aware that we do. Giving it a name and defining it helps us to do it more consistently, put it into practice more effectively, and to be able to meet and game with more people than we might otherwise be able to. So the game designer says he's butting into your game to help define it. Right? There are certain lines and veils that are being injected into the game to be truly playing it as intended. Right? there's a short list of things that will not happen or will happen in a specific way listed out. So the concept of infection could easily happen to player characters who are listed as Circle Knights, except that in the games that we play, it just doesn't happen to do so. Sex is certainly an option, but the Game Master will not presume it, will not start a scene with characters engaged in it, and will wait for the players to make those decisions themselves. Pregnancy does not happen unless the player character wants it to. Rape does not happen to player characters. It could happen in fictional terms, but that's not what this game is about. It's not about your character being raped. There you go. Examples of lines and veils. Which one's which? Alright, then we move into Discovery, where all of this stuff is further explained to make sense if it's new to you. And then we get into Beginnings, where the author is talking about where did this game come from. And the influences that I talked about in the beginning are explained and defined, I guess. And then we finish off that chapter with a map of the region, which I just can't show you, so I'll take a picture of and insert into the video at the end. Chapter 2, the Iron Folk, focusing on the backdrop, we'll get to in another clip. So, this meander through the beginning of the book sets me on my journey. Am I happy right now that I bought Circle of Hands? Yes. Am I happy with the authorial tone? Do I like the voice that the author uses? Most of the time. There is a hint of defensiveness in places, but this is balanced out with a hint of excitement. It's the excitement that's keeping me going. I like the clear talk about techniques. I like the clear talk about influences a lot. I like that the design process is laid bare, that the influence from the Kickstarter people who gave feedback in the early playtest is listed, and the people who gave that specific point of feedback are also mentioned. I like very much that as you read through this book, you can feel the game coming to life, but you can also see the design process, so that you can, I think, feel more confident sitting down that first time to play Circle of Hands. As we move through the book, we'll see if these initial impressions are carried forward. Thanks, if you have made it this far through the video, for watching.